live. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. Tonight we have Mark Fidelman on. Uh, Mark is doing an amazing work out there to help children and also families. Bill has always been with me on the podcast, basically doing the same work, reaching out to our communities, basically creating awareness on what a lot of children and families are going through in our society. So our goal is to be able to help. Our goal is to create awareness, for society to know the evil that is happening behind the scenes that are untold. There are a lot of stories. A lot of people have stories that are untold, and our goal is to bring these stories to you on a weekly basis. Mark, thank you so much for taking the time to join us tonight. I really appreciate you coming on.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And I'm really, really pleased having you tonight.
All right. Pleasure to be here, gentlemen.
Same. Bill, thanks as well, as always.
Thank you.
So, Mark, I'm gonna start it off. What we've been doing, basically creating awareness for parental alienation, shared parenting, children growing up, with and without both of their parents in the same home, or both parents active in their lives. We know this is a growing issue in our societies. It is becoming a pandemic. If I think I'm confident enough to say that it's not a pandemic because a lot of children are being deprived, from seeing a parent. It could be a mom or dad, and so a lot of children are growing up in single parent home, and it is not healthy for our societies. It is not healthy for our children. It is not healthy for the next generation. And so I truly appreciate you taking the time to come on and speak on these issues. I know you focus a lot on children uh, and their health and their future. Um, how did you get involved in this movement? Like, what was the motivation behind your involvement in this movement?
Yeah, I mean, I came into it thinking it was dads only. I quickly realized it's dads and moms that are losing their kids to a system that I think is either incompetent, and not everyone in it. I hate painting with a broad brush, but incompetent, don't know what they're doing, don't have any empathy, or just plain corruption, which there's plenty of lawsuits out there that can prove that. I think in general, the people that enter family court are trying to do the right thing, but there's so many people pointing fingers at one another within the system. And if any one of them is broken with some of the things I just said, then it could appear to somebody that's a litigant that, oh, it's corrupt and evil. I don't know of anyone that I've actually encountered that's real evil, but I think if you've pissed them off, they're human beings. You've pissed them off, or they haven't been trained properly, or there's somebody putting pressure on them the other side because they know the person from the other side. It gets real unwieldy real fast, and since we don't have juries in this system, then you've got single human beings, judges deciding these matters, and they're getting input from a variety of people within the family courts ecosystem. And then, believe me, these aren't the best of the best people that are out there. Then all hell can break loose, and it could look like it's an evil, corrupt system. Some cases it is, but I think it's more on the level of incompetence. But it doesn't matter. We have a system that's taking kids, ignoring your constitutional rights, your 14th Amendment, your 6th Amendment, probably your first, and just taking kids. And if you're a CPS worker, you could take them on an emergency basis without any warrant. It is the most egregious system, the way it's set up, that I've ever seen in any other court.
Bill, you have any follow-up comments?
Yeah, Mark, I'm assuming you're from the United States, with the laws you just quoted and how the system works. So there is a difference between Canada and the U.S., but the similarity throughout the world, like there's Oric Robertson, who has a support group in South Africa. There's Jan Janes in the UK. There's people all over the world, and there's groups all over the world. Jan Kala in Sweden. This is happening in all courts all around the world. Amanda Sillers in Australia, where they've had a review of their family court system and things they needed to happen, and I can't remember how many items they said needed to change to make the family court system better, and also because of now there's two court systems. You got your civil court, which would be family court would be under civil court, and you have your criminal court. Now, a lot of the times these family matters have dual court issues that can't be dealt with in just family court or in just criminal court, and family courts are really overworked. The criminal courts aren't. So usually the family courts, this is the process that seems to be in place all around the world. Family courts will put these civil matters on hold and wait for a decision or a judgment in the criminal matters prior to dealing with the family cases, which allows these situations to escalate, creates a false status quo based on false information, and makes the situation exponentially worse. I think we're both in agreement that that's basically the process. Doesn't matter if you're in Canada, U.S., Australia, the U.K. It's happening around the world.
Yeah, I've seen the same thing in any what I call first world country for sure. I mean, they've all adopted the same philosophy. They just follow the U.S. and we're so screwed up here in our family courts. It's unbelievable. It's all incentivized by money, folks. So just recognize that if you're in there and you feel like you're being mistreated, there's a whole litany of reasons why you might feel that way. I think it all boils down to an incentive system. I just had Sean McMillan on my podcast yesterday. All he does full time is sue CPS, and he outlined the incentive structure for CPS. So every year they've got to take more kids or they lose funding.
Yes.
I don't know how many of you know that. So that means they're going to take more and more kids every year, and then you're seeing more parents as criminals, or they're watering down the rules in order to take your kids. Now, what kind of an incentive structure is that? Take more kids every year so you can make more money and fund your operations more? Does it seem like that's a bad idea? It does to me.
Yeah, I agree. I'm familiar with the American system, and that's the Title IV Defunding Act that came into existence back in the 70s when a lot of fathers were walking away from their families. And at that time, women weren't as out in the workplace like they are today, and there wasn't as much equality. And women were staying at home raising the children and didn't have a source of income. So if a father left, they would become dependent on the state. So the state created this Title IV defunding to go after fathers. But by doing so, this legislation created a tap to get money from families. And like you said, each state gets federal funding from the federal government dependent on the number of children they have in the system. So the more children state officials or child protection agencies take from families, the more funding they get from the federal government. And that is just wrong. There should be, instead of the money being used to divide families and, like you said, incentivized taking children from families, there should be resources put to maintaining families and keeping families together. And that would overall make the process better for families and wouldn't create this spiral effect of children growing up without parents and them growing up without parents growing up and following the same pattern that they grew up in. It's a terrible spiral effect that's being created by the system.
And the sad part is they know it, and they won't do anything about it. So there's no political will. They continue to get sued for people like Sean McMillan, and for the first million, it just puts the taxpayer. After the first million, then the agency has to pay it. But if it's under $1 million that you're shooting for, the taxpayer pays for it. So what do they care, right? It's an egregiously set up system, and a lot of family court could be fixed just by changing the incentive structure. We've got like a family parents' Bill of Rights that we're going to start working on as soon as my case is over, and it outlines, hey, no parent should have to pay more than $25,000 for the divorce without a very, very special reason. And that eliminates the incentives for these attorneys to go back and forth, back and forth. Hey, we're going to, create
Yes,
such animosity here with the two parties that they just continue to fight.
Yeah.
and that's right. This situation will go on as long as there's money to be fought.
Yeah. I mean, these attorneys have to retire. They got to pay for, everything they have in retirement. They don't have a 401k, most of them as a family law attorney. So we're just going to take from other parents, and I can't imagine the ethical or moral code that these people live under. Not all, and I want to say not all family court attorneys are bad.
No,
They're not, because there's some good ones out there. But it's hard for them to be successful in a system that's this bad, right? You have to kind of be bad to be successful in a bad system, unfortunately. And that's what I'm seeing.
Yeah. So, Mark, in your view, do you think it's more of a war against children or more against dads?
I don't
Because
see a war against children. They definitely don't put the children's interests first, even though that's exactly what they say they do. They put their own self-interest, their own economic interest first. And then if it's aligned with that, then they'll help the parents and then they'll help the kids. I think it's in that order. Again, you have attorneys that don't subscribe to that. So I want to be very clear. But most of them want to create this dysfunction so that, hey, dad, you just lost your kids. Well, which dad worth their salt wouldn't move heaven and earth and spend every dime they have to get their kids back?
Yeah.
Which one?
Yeah.
And they know that. And so they try to position dads and moms. I don't want to pick on moms because I know a lot of moms that have been impacted by this. But they try to target one parent or the other, create this wedge, and they know that a mom or dad will fight like mad and spend every dime they have to see their kids again.
any parent will, and I think that's part of the problem. The whole system is adversarial, and there has to be a winner and a loser. And instead of trying to do things collaboratively to come up with the best solution for the family, they just look to throw gas on the fire and keep it burning more, so they can get as much money and have this situation go on as long as they can. It's
I mean, you guys know that you just put a mother and father in a room for 2 days, maybe even a day, that 90% of these cases can be solved that way. But it doesn't work that way. It's back and forth, and everything's delayed, and there's all these motions and reports and all that kind of stuff. And they just delay. And 4 years later, you spent $500,000, and you still don't have your kids, and you finally get out of that crazy system. They could do this in 2 days. I guarantee 90% of these cases could be done in 2 days.
yeah, I agree. And like when you start this court process, initially they'll tell you the maximum number of years it can take is 2 years, right? But 2 years, by the time you realize you've spent 7 years plus in the courts fighting for the same thing. And the funny thing is, I mean, based on my own personal experience, for over a 2 year period, every 3 months we were in court, right? And so you do the math, and most of these lawyers who go in or have, their idea is to find a solution, but truly, it's just a cover up because it's all about their pockets, right? The strategy is to stretch the case as much as they can for them to be able to maximize whatever they need to get from both of the families. I've heard about families, going bankrupt. I mean, Bill was just telling me earlier on, like he lost everything, his house, everything, investment, everything was lost just because he wanted to be active, wanted to be present for his kids. So, and the reason why I asked if it was a war against children or against moms or dads, it looks like most of these lawyers are very good at you know positioning both of the parents against each other to fight, because you don't go to court. You go to court for a solution. You want a decision made, in the best interest of your children. But it becomes you walk out of court being the worst enemies ever in life, and it makes no sense. Do we have a way out in the future? I mean, going forward, is there a way out? I know people self-represent in court, but is there a way out from a point of view that we can actually have a system where people will come to that realization that we don't always need the lawyers. We can go in as two mature people, or we don't even need to go to the court. We can actually find solution on our own, putting the children first.
Yeah, I mean, if you follow the Scandinavian system, 97% of people don't have, they don't even think of divorce. They don't think there is a divorce court. I think there's a civil court that handles more complex matters, but 97% of them are, here's what happens, 50-50. You split the assets, there's no alimony, there's no child support, you guys move on. That's it. I think we're going to have to get to that point. I know a lot of people will complain. A lot of people think that system's unfair, but you ask them, it's more than fair because they're not spending tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands on attorney's fees. So I think that's a system we should model. In the interim, I think there's some steps that we can take to reduce all of this. Bill said it well. Why is this adversarial? Why are you making the second worst time of your life, divorce, next to the death of a loved one? Why are you making that adversarial? Would you make a death of a loved one adversarial? Who designed this system? You have to think to yourself, who designed it and for what purpose? And it always comes back to money for me. If it's adversarial, that's where the money is, because people will spend, and even in family court's worse because you have personal lives at stake. They'll spend any amount of money. So there is evil in whoever set this up, knowingly or unknowingly. The evil is also, why hasn't it been changed?
I'd like to jump in there and say that the old adage of there's no money in the cure, there's only money in treatment. So if you cure the problem, all the money shuts down. Then they don't have all these court proceedings and the whole process that pays for the judges, the lawyers, the court stenographers, the child specialists, child protection, and all these agencies that get involved. So it would cripple a whole system of government that's been created to deal with this situation.
I mean, there's a massive building in downtown San Diego, and most of it's family court related. I mean, their courtrooms are beautiful, like what you'd see in the movies. And I'm looking around and I asked some attorneys, well, what's paying for all this? And he's like, you're in it. You're in the family court system. There's more money made in family court than criminal and civil combined.
Every other court in the world, yes.
Wow. So why is this? If they stopped that beautiful building would go, unoccupied, and they wouldn't be able to cover the lease payments. So there's probably not a chance in the world, unless they're forced to, that they're going to change the system on their own.
That's right. Now, and it's funny you mentioned the Scandinavian and Sweden, that they have a great model where it's legislated shared parenting, and most people that go through divorces, they sit down together, they collaboratively do it together over a couple of days, fill out the paperwork and take it to the court and have it submitted for, a few $100s or whatever the cost is. It's very minimal relative to hiring a lawyer with a big retainer up front, then going through this process that could, for me, it began in 2015 and I'm still going through the process, and a voice of the child assessment has just been ordered by the court. So this process is just beginning. It's not going to end anytime soon. And it's just completely abusive.
Well, my question is, everyone knows it. Why hasn't it been changed?
Well, who are the ones that can make those changes?
The legislature.
Right.
So
and who's lobbying against shared parenting?
Well, I think it's fair to say that you have some extremist women's groups that don't want this to happen. And
that's one group.
Dad groups aren't as funded. They're not funded at all. There's very few grants for them. No. And again, I don't want this to be a male versus female issue, but it's a fact that it's the more of the female groups that are saying, no, we don't want shared parenting. I think that's a fact.
Well, in Canada, I believe it's if a child is living in a single parent household, 86% chance that it is with the mother, only 6% chance that it is with a father.
But that could be because I've done some research here, because the fathers work too much. They're working 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. and they can't pick up the child So some of that's explained there, but there's no question if you look at the decisions of a parent that wants to be 50-50, dad and mom, that
Mm.
it is slanted towards women. But it wasn't such a huge amount that I'm like, okay, the courts are anti-male. It's just that there's still some of that bias left in the system that women are better caretakers than men. And so some judges are still subscribed to that. It's what I'm seeing.
And I believe you're correct. Like, what's that? When a child is still breastfeeding, there's a term for it that came from the UK, where the child is to stay with the mother until this breastfeeding period is completed. Then they can share custody of the child. Somebody from Canada just recently messaged me and said that was the reason the judge made for giving custody to the mother over the father. And that's just so outdated. It's wrong.
And if you have to appeal it, it costs a ton of money. They bankrupt these parents because they're bad decisions, and so they know that. They're like, oh well, what are they have no money. They're not going to appeal my order, so I'm just going to make it.
That's it.
They do.
Now, Colorado has they're looking at creating legislation to allow non-legal professionals to represent people in family court cases, so that someone like you or myself could go and help a person that's going through divorce and handle their case. I don't know if that's going to make it through because, like I said, there's two large groups lobbying against shared parenting. One of them is feminist groups, and the other would be the legal and bar associations. In a number of states in the United States, the bar association are being sued because they're actively paying lobbyists to fight against legislation being created for shared parenting, where Kentucky adopted the shared parenting.
Yeah, they did.
And in 1 year, their family court cases dropped by 50%. And it was so successful, I believe it was 18 other states are starting or looking to adopt shared parenting legislation because it's been so successful there.
Well, then you've just shown why the state bars are all opposed to this.
Yes.
Right? Their income drops 50%. It's probably more than that. And so, of course, they're going to be against it. Oh, we can't have this.
No, and you're right. It would turn the funnel off of all the money that's being, like you said, there's more money that goes through the family court system than all other courts combined.
Right.
So this is a huge amount of money.
It is. Yeah. And then that not to mention the Title 4D funding from the federal government.
Right.
No, but I think the bar association has a lot of influence on the politicians. I believe the same money that is back channeled to run their campaigns. And so they also have a responsibility to protect whatever revenue that is coming to them through the family court. It's just a wrong approach or a wrong way of looking at it. But in my view, I think the same money that is going out of our pockets goes to these lawyers, and then they use that to fund a lot of the campaigns. That's why they are so reluctant. I strongly believe that's why they are so reluctant in even accepting the fact that equal shared parenting is in the best interest of children. Right? Bill, I don't know. I mean, you and I are in Canada. I don't know if you share the same view, but I think
in Canada, in the United States, there's a woman by the name of Joan Meyer who is a lawyer, and she's also got an honorary degree in social sciences, or she's a social scientist, and she is actively spreading information that parental alienation is created by abusive men that want to have an excuse to present to the court to be able to see their children. And part of the study that she's using to share this false information is a study that was conducted in Australia, where they went to a prison and they interviewed convicted criminals and asked them if they'd ever used the term parental alienation or was it ever brought up in their custody cases to see their children. So instead of taking or doing a scientific study where you take a random sampling or a large sample to try and get a random sampling of the general population, they went to a prison. Only a small percentage of the population of the world is in prison. And they're trying to use this targeted group of convicted criminals to say that all men are abusive. And this is a made up term by these men. And by doing that, they're completely discounting all the women that suffer from alienation. Because the largest study that's ever been conducted on parental alienation was conducted, I believe, in Sweden. And it was their determination that it's almost 50-50 between men and women that alienate, because it's not based on gender, it's based on personality disorders. And the two disorders that are most likely to exhibit alienating behaviors are people that suffer from narcissistic personality disorder and people that suffer from borderline personality disorder.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. So, I mean, the question, of course, is how do you solve that? Because then we're getting into diagnoses, and I don't really trust the professionals surrounding the family court system because of incentives and all of that. So how do you get to that point where you're saying I'm being parentally alienated? Well, I don't think you're being parentally alienated if you've got custody 50% of the time. So why not just give custody 50-50 to everybody?
Yeah.
Unless somebody's been criminally convicted,
Yeah.
right? Then that changes things. Not this family court watered down, get a restraining order for tripping over your shoelace. And then you have to fight a presumption in order to see your kids. That is so ridiculous on its face that we should be ashamed as a society to have anything like that in place.
That's right.
Yeah.
I agree.
Right.
The whole system is flawed because, again, divorces never began through the courts. Only men were allowed to apply for divorce, and that was through the churches. And women back in the 70s joined with child protection issues, and some of them were in abusive relationships and they couldn't get a divorce and they were stuck with their spouse and they had no means of income or support. So they joined with child's rights to get funding to create supports so they could leave abusive relationships and abusive spouses. Now that's how the system was back in the 70s, and the women, they couldn't get a divorce. So when they joined with these child protection, they petitioned, they got it through the courts. So divorces now go through the courts, and women are allowed to petition the court for divorce when they weren't allowed to with the church. Now this has created a whole new system, and that's where the Title IV defunding jumped in. And these issues just have grown exponentially since then to where the system is actively trying to separate families to make money.
Yeah, that's the way I see it. I don't think that's the intent for most of these players, but it happens, and then you have judges rubber stamping it. That's my big problem. It's like, well, wait, you're not smart enough as a judge to see what's going on. Everyone else can see it. Why haven't you figured it out? And that's where I'm thinking, maybe they're buddies with one of these attorneys that they haven't disclosed, or maybe the professional they brought in is extremely biased professional. If it's a 730 eval or minors counsel. And they're brought in special for this case because one of the parents is being targeted. I don't know. I've just heard these rumors and whistleblowers that have told me what they've seen. Because they're human beings, they have extreme biases. They're influenced by maybe a dad that reminded them of somebody they dated in high school, and they're like, this guy was bad in high school, so he looks like the same guy, and I know he's bad as a father, so then every ruling is against him. It's all sorts of things because they are dealing with humans. We're not dealing with a neutral jury. And so one of my tenets of the 10 family, new laws that should be implemented, one of them is, hey, if a parent is going to lose his child or have very restricted access to his children, there must be a jury trial. We cannot rely on judges and guardian ad litems to make those determinations. There must be a jury trial. It must be at that level, and it must be beyond a preponderance of the evidence. It has to be clear and convincing that this is not a fit parent. And so that would be one of the tenets that I would put in play if I had a magic wand.
It's okay to create new legislation, and create new legislation creates new problems that were not viewed. The UK, a number of years ago, they decided to do away with paying for the divorces of women unless there were allegations of abuse, or abuse was present. So do you know what happened to the statistics of abuse in women
What
overnight?
skyrocketed?
They skyrocketed. So after 2 years of this process, and I believe the statistics were 89% of the allegations of abuse never made it to court. They were all dropped. So only 11% of all these cases that were being claimed of abuse, which by just making the mere claim of abuse, the lawyers were paid for them, and they got to go and have a lawyer represent them in family court proceedings. But over the 2 years, when they ran the statistics and the numbers, 89% of the cases were just not valid.
Well, you can do it here in the States, and you get an automatic advantage that's really difficult for a father or mother to overcome. It takes years to overcome it because these attorneys keep delaying things and delaying things. So just the allegation, even if you're not proven to be true, or maybe part of it's true, they just throw a bunch of stuff against the wall and they pick one that's true and say, we'll give her a restraining order. It takes a long time to overcome that. And
Yes.
It's a fundamentally unfair. So one of my other tenets is, okay, you want a restraining order, it's automatically mutual. And it doesn't go on any record or anything like that, but it is mutual. And that way there's no incentive for anyone to get it maliciously, because if you go and get one, because you really need one, in family court, it has to be mutual.
Yeah.
If you go to criminal court, then it could be separate, because now we're at a different standard. Now we're at a clear and convincing standard. But family court, when they're just like, you just feel threatened, even though nobody said anything to you, and you get one, that's so fundamentally unfair.
That was the grounds on which the judge granted a restraining order for 1 year against me. My ex testified that there'd never been any violence between us. The children never witnessed any violence between us. The only thing they ever witnessed were raised voices, which, is common. We did not get along, and we ended up getting divorced. But the judge had no evidence that anything other than raised voices had taken place between us. And when he gave his ruling, he said, there are no criteria that needs to be satisfied for me to grant this peace bond. The only thing that needs to be satisfied is for me to believe she's fearful. I believe she's fearful. Granted, 1 year. Now, I got the court recording of that, and I put it on one of my Facebook pages to share that with everyone. It's unbelievable. This is a criminal matter that took place, and it was granted because he believed someone was fearful, when
Exactly.
she even acknowledged there was no reason for her to be fearful, because the only thing that ever happened between us was raised voices.
Look, it's so watered down. I mean, if you look at the statistics, I think 1 out of every 3 involves some sort of restraining order, because you can get away with it. You can't be sued, although there are laws in the books. Very rarely are they criminally prosecuted for false allegations. So then you got to go to civil court and you got to sue them. It's a disaster. So of course they're going to do it, because there's no ramifications to what they put on that pleading, because they have litigation privilege.
Yes.
And it's like, what? This system is such a circus. I would not advise anyone to marry into it. If you want to get married, get a spiritual marriage at a church. Do not sign anything having to do with the government, and just have a civil contract that says, hey, if we ever break up, this is what you get. Now, it's perfectly legal. You just stay out of the family court, because you go into family court, it's a freaking dice roll. Don't do it.
Keith Marsalek, he runs Parental Alienation Worldwide Support Groups, and he's one of the first groups, or one of the people that first helped me in my process. And that's what he tells everyone: don't get married. If you want to stop going to family court and going through this process, stop getting married. And that's it, exactly. Stay clear of the courts.
Family courts, yeah. I mean, I think the civil and criminal are slightly better. But I've witnessed in criminal court, and I hope we get to the Rob Emmer case here in a minute, has been just as egregious. And I've never been exposed to the criminal court myself, never even been arrested. But
I have been.
I have a friend that's in jail right now without bail as a father. His name is Rob Emmer, and would love to talk about that when you guys are ready.
Yeah.
Yes.
Before you do, Mark, I have a question for you. Somebody posted a question on, I believe, YouTube, Michael. And basically what he's saying is that, the system is teaching children that broken homes or broken families are the norm. And it looks like we have more broken homes now than we used to have years back, and so children are going to grow up thinking that this is a way of life. What's your take on that?
Well, if his last name is Michael A, you should have him on your show. He's got 30 years of experience on this one. I've got 4. But from what he's saying is absolutely true. Here we are training a generation, kids, not to trust the system and to become part of a broken family, dysfunctional broken family. It's okay if you want to get divorced. I'm all for it. If that's what's best for you personally, you have to be happy as a man, as a woman. But when the kids are used as weapons, when you weaponize your kids to hurt the other parent, that's where I draw the line. Stop that practice, because now all you've trained them to do is distrust the opposite sex, or whoever they're weaponizing you against, and that is lifelong. You need lots of therapy to get over that.
Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
just one more question before we Lisa Breeze Link said that an ordained minister can marry a couple with just a family Bible, no marriage license. I'm not sure about the US, but in Canada, once you are ordained, the government issues you a license, and that license basically allows you to, you know, officiate marriages. But there's also a back channel of documents that need to be fed back into the government, right? Where
Don't
the
sign the
government
back channel.
well, the government issues a marriage certificate, right? And I believe most of what you do in the system, especially when it comes to taxation, they need proof. Bill, correct me if I'm wrong. They need a proof that you guys are married, and oftentimes they'll request for this certificate. So I don't know, or I don't think that the ordained minister officiating the marriage and issuing some form of certificate is sufficient enough in Canada. Even in the US, I don't know if that's a good grounds to basically be married.
Well, in the U.S., if the state doesn't recognize it, it's not official marriage. Who cares? What? You can't file a joint tax return. You can't file, or you can't visit them in the hospital, which is bullshit. You can. There are some laws around this now. So what's the point? What's the advantage of being married as opposed to a spiritual marriage recognized by God, if you believe
Yeah,
in God, or
yeah,
whatever spiritual, whatever religion you are? That's more important. I
yeah.
mean, the state that's got a system that when you break up totally destroys families, why in the heck would you ever want to be a part of that or subscribe to that? That's insanity to me. Until that's cleaned up, until that's fixed, there's no way I would ever want to jump back into a system like that. So just get married. I'm all for marriage. I think kids are better, raised with two parents
Yep,
in a loving home.
yep.
But it doesn't mean you have to sign up for a marriage license with the state. It just doesn't.
The We have a system where a common law. I think there's a feedback on the show. Do you hear the feedback, Bill, on your side?
I'm sorry, I just missed the last few minutes of conversation. My daughter phoned me, so I just muted the mic there for a second, and I missed the last minute or two of conversation. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, we're
I
only
just-
getting feedback from your mic, I think.
Yeah, there's a feedback on one of the mics. Okay, okay. So in Canada, there's this system where common law system where even if you're not married legally, once you can prove that you've lived, in case there's both parties decide to go the separate ways. Once you can justify that you've lived under the same roof for a period of 2 years, you are legally considered as marriage. In that case, the same law still applies to you through the family court. So they've designed it in such a way that you don't have a way out. At least in Canada, that common law system basically is there as as something that will make up for the official marriage. And even if you're not legally married and you're in a common law relationship, you can still go through that family court system if one of the partners decide to go through court, you are still, entangled in a system because, one can justify that we live together for 2 years under the same roof. And so legally you are considered as married.
Yeah, and I will say there's all sorts of palimony laws here in California. After a certain amount of time, they'll just assume you're married and drag you into family court that way. Or if you have children, they could drag you into family court. But if you have a civil contract that outlines everything that you want to happen ahead of time, you can at least start in civil court and fight to move to family court as for jurisdiction. So it's better at first fault.
Okay. So we'll just jump into the Rob case. So
yeah. Have we solved the echo problem here?
I think
I'm just
you
trying
mute
to
your
figure out.
microphone, it might work. Like now. Okay.
Okay, I think the echo's gone. He might have just dropped out for a second to reset his connections.
Okay, how about now?
There's still an echo.
Yeah, there's still an echo.
I'll mute myself. See if it's fine.
I can drop out and re-enter if that will help.
Well, I think you're fine.
Okay.
Okay, I'm just trying to mute myself.
Whoa. Yeah.
Yep. That was it.
Yes, there was a lot of background noise.
Okay, so the Rob Emmer case.
Yes, I'd like to hear about that.
All right, so this started as a case where Rob and his ex-wife had joint custody, and Rob, a new judge came on. Her name is Patty Radican, and she's more of a commissioner. Now, Rob tried to recuse her because he didn't want a commissioner to hear the case, but she refused to recuse. And from that point on, things started to get, really bad for Rob. And to a point where he lost custody entirely because of some things that I witnessed and other attorneys had witnessed in the case. And the judge being caught then removed his rights as punishment for Rob, setting up a situation where he felt like he was being wronged. I mean, the judge all of a sudden out of nowhere wanted to put Rob's son into a residential facility, and Rob got upset by that, and decided that he was not going to obey the court order, which, from what I can tell, what other people can tell, was fraudulently obtained. The judge knowingly relied on fraudulent information to make this particular order. And Rob then said, "Hey, I'm going to tell you where I'm at. Bryce is free to go to his mom's if he wants." And his son didn't do it. His son is now 15 and decided not to go back to mom's, wanted to stay with dad's. Everyone knew where Rob was. He was corresponding with the DA. He was corresponding with the FBI. He was corresponding with everybody. And then about a year later, just recently, he was arrested, taken down by federal marshals. The marshals took Rob down. There's a video of this. And also punched his son and took his son down, who's 15 years old. So this is what they do in these types of situations. So now Rob's been in jail since, I think, the 2nd, without bail. So here's a loving father, never was ruled not to be a good father, who had a commissioner that that's not just me, in most people's eyes, was acted in a very corrupt manner, fraudulent manner, and as a result, put him in this situation, and he felt the only way that he could help his son out was to not bring him back, because he didn't want his son going to a residential facility, where they drug him up and they do all these things. And so he's stuck in court now. He's not been granted bail, and the attorney that he has said to me that he's never seen anything like this, that this is total retaliation. They didn't like the fact that Rob was talking to the DA, talking to the FBI, and talking to press about what he witnessed and others witnessed. So now you have a system, a family court, that's putting dads, I'm sure there's some moms out there, in jail without bail because of, disobeying a court order that was fraudulently obtained. And if you heard the judge, the criminal judge who was pulled out of retirement to rule on this case, he had said that Rob is a flight risk and that the letters that were sent in support of Rob proved that he was a flight risk. When I've read every one of those letters, it says just the opposite. Rob's not a flight risk. His own son put in a letter stating that he wanted the judge to give bail. Now, how could you have somebody because they're alleging PC 278, how can you allege that somebody kidnapped their own son and his son is writing letters on Rob's behalf to get out of jail? But the judge took that as, oh, everyone's saying that he is a flight risk, or a few people are saying that he is a flight risk. So we can't let this dad, this loving dad, who took care of his son and daughter for most of the marriage, we can't let him out of jail. We got a no bail situation. So this is obviously punishment to show the rest of us that, hey, you mess with the court system, you criticize the court system, this is what's going to be done to you.
Feedback back?
No, it's
I
good.
hear you fine.
Yeah, it's good now. It's good.
Okay, good. I agree completely. I've been following a number of cases here, and the people who have had the system abused against them and tried to fight the system and get the truth out and get the true information out there for decisions to be made based on the information, have been retaliated against by the judges and the courts by awarding costs to the other party, and that's the stage I'm at. So the next stage after cost awards is they try to remove you as a parent from or guardian, so that they don't have to deal with you at all in the courts. And this process I've documented with a number of people. And some people did want to speak and take part in a documentary to show this process. But there's some that also, after the cost awards in the amounts of $60,000 to the former spouse and threats to have them go to jail if they didn't sell their home to bring up to pay the costs immediately, that they've since declined to take part, and they're terrified. And that's what you're up against when you start down this road to try and keep your children in your life. People don't want you to try and fight and be in your life for your children. And statistics have already proven that not having a father or both parents in a child's life is detrimental. They don't grow up and develop normal attachments. And this is where the process of personality disorders begins, unresolved childhood trauma. And the system is just creating a place for this to happen. And they're supporting it.
Yeah, well, I can tell you why, because I've done a lot of research on this, and this will come out in my book. What you have is a system with no accountability. Yeah, they claim they got the CJP here, they've got the state bar. But when you look at the auditor's report, these aren't my reports, you look at the auditor's report, they were so highly critical of the CJP and the state bar about disciplining their own members and judges that they're going through these reforms. We'll see if they actually do them. And if you talk to the CJP, which governs judges, they can discipline judges. They only have a limited scope of things that they can discipline a judge in. Yeah. So when you're in a system like that and you don't have self-awareness and you're not moral, you can virtually do anything, especially in family court with all the discretion. You can do anything and get away with it. they're not going to come after me. Even if they do, I'll get a slap on the wrist, and maybe I won't do it next time. Maybe I will. And they know that. And you can't sue a judge because of their absolute immunity, at least within the scope of judging. So they can't be sued for a decision. They can't be sued for what they do, even if it's quasi-criminal. It's unbelievable. So if you have a system without accountability, well, then what's the old adage? The old adage is, it will become corrupt more and more over time.
Absolute power corrupts absolutely.
I was going to get to that. Thank you. So that's what you have in this situation. And, we've allowed it to happen. I guess we haven't allowed it to happen. The legislature has allowed it to happen. And the state bar is so powerful in most of these states. And good luck fighting it, right?
You're right. Now, there are people that have tried to sue judges, and there's very limited ability to be able to sue judges. One is if they act outside the capacity of their job. And again, trying to meet or prove that threshold is almost impossible because their friends are the ones making a decision on whether you meet that threshold. So there's you're right. There's absolutely no accountability throughout the system. The people aren't protected, and the people at the top, they're very well insulated and protected by a number of agencies. And these agencies are tax dollars pay for, and they're meant to protect us from this abuse.
And they can't in most circumstances, or they're overloaded with workload. And this is what the analyst was saying: is that's not an excuse. Get more money from the legislature to prosecute them because the problems are just going to get worse. My biggest problem is not necessarily with the judges, though. It's more about the immunity given to these third parties, like the CJP, like these psychiatrists, like a guardian ad litem. They all have this quasi immunity. And it drives me crazy because they can basically get away with anything as long as they don't lie in a report. There's a famous video online you guys should all look at just to illustrate and to underscore what I'm talking about. It's called the right to lie case. And this was in front of I think the 9th District Court here in California, I believe. Don't quote me on that, but just type in right to lie case in YouTube. And you have this CPS attorney that's arguing that it's okay to lie. If you're a CPS worker, it's okay to lie on a report, and that they shouldn't be able to be sued as a result of their lies taking your kids away.
Yeah.
Now, thank God we had 3 justices there, these appellate justices, that looked at each other like, what is she talking about? And they basically come back and say, anyone with an IQ above the room temperature in Alaska, what's room temperature in Alaska, 40? knows that you can't lie on these reports, especially to take kids away. They were just outraged that that's how CPS thought that you can lie on these reports to take kids away, and you had immunity.
Yes.
Unbelievable. So if you take that and extrapolate it across family court, you know what the problem is now, right?
I actually remember seeing that video. It's really, like you said, it's scary to believe that a lawyer stood up and argued in front of 3 judges that it's okay for them to lie. Yeah, and I believe California created legislation to make sure people were aware that lying, child protection workers lying and submitting false reports was a criminal offense. They actually had to create a law to let people know that that was wrong.
Well, and then none of them get prosecuted, but there are attorneys and only specialists that will sue CPS if there's any lies within their report. And what we've learned from discovery is that the frontline workers aren't incentivized to do that, but the supervisors are. So we saw a lot of supervisors changing the frontline CPS workers' reports so that they had an excuse to go take the child out of the system. And the CPS workers, all they want to do is make their money, get their pension, and retire, right? So They don't want to rock the apple cart and tell anyone, oh, the supervisor changed my report to make it look worse than it was.
Wow.
But that's exactly what's happening. Not with every CPS. I don't want to label all social workers as bad, but we know it happens. We know it does.
Yeah. So, just going back to Rob Emmert's case, he's basically being used as a scapegoat to basically, deter other people from standing up to to the family court, basically to calling them out of their mistakes and the unfairness in the system. And because he's being used as a scapegoat, basically, there are people that may be afraid, just calling them out, right? That their decisions are very biased, and as a result of that, they become the winner. The family court become the winner at the end of the day, because if nobody stand up to their wrongful decisions, then moms don't win, dads don't win, the children loses, and the court win.
Yeah, I mean, the system protects itself. You ask any
Yes.
attorney, you can't, if you're an attorney, you can't criticize the system or you're going to be blacklisted and even disbarred. So the system can't even talk about how bad the system is, at least not publicly. And the system's going to protect itself if any outsider, like the three of us, starts to attack it. So you have to be very careful how you do it and what you do. Unbelievably, the FBI here, the Attorney General, they won't touch the family court. The only hope we have is someone bring something to the grand jury. Here in California, if you bring something to the state grand jury, guess what? The only body they can't investigate are judges. Isn't that interesting? So you have to bring it to the federal grand jury with a federal suit to state, hey, this whole thing is corrupt, and whether it's the judges independently or the system itself, we're finding that this system is unconstitutional, and we need to order an investigation and start prosecuting people for perpetuating it.
Yes, I agree. There needs to be accountability throughout the system, and it needs to start somewhere. And you're right. At the top, there's the judges who have the ability to make decisions in family court cases. They don't need to have any amount of evidence to make these decisions. They can do so at their own discretion. And as the judges, you can't appeal based on the decision. You need to have grounds for appeal. And basically, it allows them to make decisions however they feel or however they want, whether it's based on the evidence or their own opinion and feelings.
Well, they know the case law. So the worst of these judges state things on the record that basically check those boxes so that you can appeal anything here in California, but they'll position it so, oh, you want to appeal this? Well, I'm going to say some things on the record, and I have to be believed over anything else. Is kind of the appellate way here. They look to the judge as the first. They presume the judge to be honest and true and correct.
Yes.
And so they just position the decision that way so that when the appellate court looks at it, it's a lot harder for the appellate court to turn it over because they have to give most of the weight to the judge. I mean, talk about the system covering their each of their own asses. It's really outrageous.
Yeah.
It is.
But the thing is, I strongly believe, like politicians, I strongly believe that a lot of these judges have friends, behind the scenes, including the lawyers. And so, for a friend to throw a friend under the bus, it doesn't happen that easily. They always want to protect their own, unfortunately. But we must highlight some of these issues, call them out when they are wrong. That's the only way we can make some progress in this battle that we are all finding ourselves in right now.
Yeah, I mean, my biggest beef is with the mainstream media, who is loath to cover these stories because, they don't want to pick a side. Mom, dad, they don't want to pick a side. But if you find something like provably fraudulent or corrupt in a government body, then they're more likely to pick up that story. But I think a lot of them are intimidated or feel like if they did that, then something bad would happen to them personally. And frankly, I can't blame them. There aren't enough whistleblowers to come forward because they lose their pension or they be blacklisted in the community. But so there needs to be some sort of a law, that's a whistleblower law, specifically to the legal system, so that we can hear some of these stories that we know are going on, but getting to them is nearly impossible because of the fear that some of these workers have of losing pensions or being blacklisted.
But do you find most of these mainstream media, they don't? I usually don't see them talking about the parents in custody battles a lot. But when it has to do with children, they all jump on it. They all seem to want to talk about the children, not what's in the best interest of children, but whatever is connected to children that they think it's it will get some views for them. I think they promote that, and that's very unfortunate. That is very, very sad that the real issues that are affecting our societies are not being addressed. Obviously, the children are affected the most, and they rather focus on these kids and leave the real parents that are going through these battles in the courts, that are facing some of these unfair judges, making outrageous decisions, just for their own pockets. It's just rather unfortunate. Bill, you were going to say something before we.
I was just agreeing with Mark. Everything he said tonight, he's very accurate.
Yeah.
You've got a clear understanding of the system and things that need to happen to make it better. And I'm just in agreement with his position and everything that he said tonight. It's a corrupt system. There needs to be. It's not going to change on its own, and there's no accountability throughout the system. Something needs to be implemented to create accountability. Otherwise, nothing is going to change. And you're right. People, I don't know how to implement that. It's how do you get the judges who have all this power and control, and the politicians who employ them to try to do what's best for everybody instead of looking after their friends.
Well, there are some movements like the BLM movement that's shown us one way. I'm hoping that we can do it through legislation, but there's just too many people on the other side of this that have big voting blocks, and they're much more organized and much better funded because most of the grant programs go to these groups. There's not a lot that go to groups like yours. Which is why I have a charity called Kids Matter, and we're going to start. We've raised a lot of money so far, but we're going to raise full on after my case is over, and really try to position. First, just starting with the Parental Bill of Rights here in California, and I hope other states will copy this. And I think, and I've vetted this out pretty well. I think this would help stop a lot of this. Imagine if you're only signing up for $25,000 in a divorce max for both sides. How long are these attorneys going to keep things going if they know that they bill $400 or $500 an hour here in California? If they know that's all they're going to get, they're going to resolve this magically. You'll see how much faster these things get resolved.
That's so true. That is so true. Yeah.
So just change the incentives, and you will fix the system, not completely, but you'll change what's happened to you, Bill, and to you, Ben, and to myself, and especially somebody like Rob Emmer.
Thank you. That's our hope. We know the system's not going to change overnight, and it's only going to come in small incremental changes. But it's got to start somewhere, and that's why we're here talking to people like you. And thank you for coming on and sharing your knowledge and everything with us tonight. I appreciate that very much.
My pleasure. Thank you, gentlemen.
Yeah, Mark, thank you so much. But just before you go, I know you have a lot of your followers on Mark tonight. Do you have any final words for them?
Yes. What's happened to Rob is a travesty. What's happened to his son is a travesty. And I'm sure his daughter as well, who we haven't mentioned, is impacted by this. Even his ex-wife's impacted by this. And it all stems from a system that needs to be changed. And I hope you join me in calling for some of these changes, donating if you have the money to Kids Matter in order to help fund some of these initiatives. And I promise you, this is a lifelong mission to me until the family courts are reformed.
Well, good luck in that process. I agree with you. I'm kind of the same way here. I'm not just trying to do this for myself. There's other people that just don't have the ability to fight the system, and their families are being destroyed by this process. So I commend you on trying to help people. Thank you very much.
And those are the people we want to help, the disadvantaged that don't have the money. That is exactly our target market. If you have kids and you don't have a lot of money and you're being totally run over by the courts, those are the people that we help.
Yes, we need to protect the children, the next generations, to keep
Right.
this from going on.
Thank you so
All
much, Mark. I
My
truly
pleasure.
appreciate all the effort that you're putting in. You know, in this mission that we all find ourselves in. Unfortunately, all of us have been through the system. All three of us. I know Bill is still going through it. Yourself, Mark, might just finished about last year after 7 years. Which after 7 years we've been to court again about 3 months ago. Um, but it's just not right. We need all hands on deck. We need every voice. Don't sit on the fence, hoping that something can happen just right off the back. Every voice is needed. Your contributions, your financial support, whatever you can do to support this mission. Please, we need you. I mean, we need you. If you can connect your families, bring them, up to speed, with what's going on in our societies. It's all necessary for us to win this battle. It's not just a battle for Marco, Bill, or myself, but there are a lot of families, like thousands of men, women, families that are going through the same problems. And my hope is that we'll be able to bring this, to an end. It's just unfair for families. Families are being destroyed. Children are just being destroyed, um, and that is not right. It's not human. It's just wrong. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We really appreciate you spending the time with us. We are back again next Sunday, and have yourself a wonderful night and a very good week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you very
guys.
Can
much.
stay on for a sec, Mark. Yeah, just one sec. I'll end the show and